46 men sat waiting to die. No chains, no guards forcing them. They were waiting by choice, and every single one of them was smiling. This is not a war scene. This is not a battlefield. This is a ceremony. And what these men were about to do voluntarily is one of the most disturbing, fascinating, and misunderstood acts in human history. But to understand why they were smiling, you need to understand something first. The samurai were never what you think they were, and the truth is so much stranger. The word samurai means one thing in Japanese, the one who serves. That is it. No poetry, no philosophy. In the beginning, these men were armed tax collectors. The feudal lords needed someone to force peasants to pay. And because peasants never liked paying, these collectors started carrying weapons. With time, the weapons got bigger, the lands got larger, and the job became hereditary. A child born next to a sword before he learned to walk. His entire life decided before he took his first step. This is where the samurai story starts, not in glory, in enforcement. But then something happened that would transform these glorified tax collectors into the most iconic warrior class in human history. And it started with an invasion that should have destroyed them completely. The largest military force on earth arrived at Japan's shores. Veterans who had already conquered China, Persia, and half of Russia. They came with poisoned arrows, gunpowder bombs, and synchronized tactics that no Japanese warrior had ever seen. And the samurai walked out to meet them the only way they knew how. One warrior stepped forward from the Japanese line, shouted his name, shouted his clan, and requested an honorable duel. The Mongols did not duel, they fired. What saved Japan that day was not the samurai's bravery, it was a storm. A storm so devastating it destroyed the entire fleet overnight. The Japanese called it kamikaze, the divine wind. But here is what the history books bury. The samurai did not celebrate and go home. They looked at what had nearly destroyed them and made a decision that most warrior cultures never make. They admitted they were wrong. They abandoned the theatrical one-on-one duel forever. They learned to fight in formations. They built fortifications. They developed their weapons. And when Portuguese merchants arrived 2 centuries later carrying primitive firearms, the samurai did not reject them as dishonorable. They reverse engineered them within months. By the late 1500s, Japan had more firearms than any European country on earth. The samurai used them in rotating firing lines, creating a continuous wall of fire that shredded cavalry charges. This was not the honorable sword fight of legend. This was calculated industrial warfare. So why does everyone still picture them with a sword? Because the sword was never about fighting. It was about something far more dangerous. It was about identity. The long sword, the short sword, worn on the left hip, always visible, always present. In a country where no one else could carry weapons publicly, these 2 blades announced everything: your class, your power, your right to take a life if you felt disrespected. There were actual laws permitting a samurai to execute a commoner on the spot for showing insufficient deference. But here is where it gets complicated. The same warrior code that granted this terrifying power also demanded something extraordinary in return. 2 of Japan's greatest warlords fought each other for over a decade. Neither could defeat the other. Then one of them received devastating news. His territory had run out of salt. In the ancient world, salt meant life. Without it, food rotted, armies starved, populations collapsed. His enemy knew this, and his enemy had enough salt to weaponize the shortage. Instead, the enemy general sent his rival an entire shipment, with a message that said, "I fight with the sword, not with starvation." When that rival general died years later, the man who had sent the salt wept publicly and said, "I have lost my greatest enemy." This was the contradiction that made the samurai impossible to fully understand. Terrifying brutality and breathtaking nobility, sometimes in the same person, sometimes in the same week. They called this code Bushido, the way of the warrior. It was not a rulebook, it was an identity transplant. It demanded that a man be a storm in battle and a poet in peace. That he treat death as a companion rather than an enemy, that he master calligraphy and painting and verse alongside swordsmanship and archery. Their symbol was the cherry blossom, not because it was beautiful, because it fell. It bloomed for days, then dropped at the height of its perfection, never fading, never rotting, just gone. This was not a metaphor to the samurai, it was a target. Live completely, serve absolutely, and when the moment comes, exit at your peak. Which brings us back to those 46 men in white kimonos, waiting, smiling. Their lord had been insulted. A powerful court official had mocked his gift in front of witnesses. The lord did the only thing his honor permitted. He drew his sword in a place where drawing swords was forbidden. The court's response was immediate. He was ordered to perform seppuku. His lands were seized, his men were dismissed. Overnight, 47 samurai became ronin, the wave man. A samurai without a lord had no identity in Japanese society. He could not return to his master because his master was dead. He could not become a farmer or merchant because his code forbade it. Many sold their swords, their armor, piece by piece until nothing remained of what they had been. But 47 of them made a different choice. For 2 years, they scattered across Japan. Some became drunks, some became wanderers. All of it performance, all of it designed to convince their enemies' spies that they were broken, finished, irrelevant. Then, on the coldest night of winter, they came together. They moved through darkness and snow to their enemy's castle. They killed the guards. They found the man who had destroyed their lord, and they took his head. They carried it through the snow to their lord's grave, placed it at the stone, and kneeled. Then they turned themselves in. The court was in an impossible position. These men had violated the law, but what they had done was the purest expression of everything the samurai code demanded. Loyalty past death, honor past survival. The court gave them the only gift it could: permission to die as warriors. 46 men performed seppuku on the same day. The 47th had been sent away before the attack to carry news of what they planned to do. He lived for years after. When he finally died, he was buried with his brothers. This story became the defining myth of the samurai, told in plays, paintings, films, and novels for 300 years. But myths have a cost. Peace came, real peace, the kind that lasts not years but centuries. And the samurai had no idea what to do with it. There were no enemies, no lords under threat, no reason to draw a sword. The economic system shifted from rice to money, and suddenly a class that had been paid in grain found itself unable to afford the goods being sold around them. They were forced to sell their rice to the merchant class, the people at the very bottom of the social hierarchy, at whatever price the merchant offered. The warrior who had once commanded silence from entire streets was now haggling over grain prices with shopkeepers. Combat skills that had taken generations to refine became exhibition performances at festivals, paid entertainment. The sword that had once been the soul of the samurai became decoration on a wall. Then the Americans arrived. Giant iron ships carrying cannons unlike anything Japan had seen, and a single demand: open your ports or face the consequences. Japan looked at those ships and understood something that centuries of civil war had never forced them to confront. They had fallen behind the world completely, and the spirit of the samurai, the swords, the honor, the code, none of it meant anything against iron and gunpowder on that scale. What followed was a revolution. The emperor reclaimed power. Japan decided to modernize at whatever cost, and the cost was steep. The samurai class was abolished, their privileges revoked, their swords banned in public. The identity they had carried for 7 centuries, stripped by government decree. They rebelled? Of course they rebelled. The last significant uprising came in 1877. Former samurai against a modern imperial army equipped with Western weapons and tactics. It was not a battle, it was a conclusion. The samurai lost, and with that they were gone. Or so it seemed. Because the same government that destroyed the samurai class decided 30 years later that it needed them back. Not the men, the idea. When Japan entered the Second World War, military leaders revived Bushido and distributed it to every soldier regardless of origin. Farmers' sons were told they were the spiritual heirs of the samurai, that surrender was the ultimate disgrace, that dying for the emperor was the highest possible honor. They even brought back the name kamikaze, the divine wind that had once saved Japan from the Mongols. This time it was not a storm. It was young men strapped into planes full of explosives with enough fuel for one direction only. No return, just impact. Seppuku, but with aircraft. The result was warfare of a ferocity the Pacific Theater had never seen. An army that genuinely did not process surrender as an option. The samurai spirit weaponized and pointed at the modern world. Then Japan lost and was destroyed. And what came next is the part of this story no one talks about. From the rubble of complete defeat, Japan built itself into one of the largest economies on Earth within a single generation, not through natural resources, not through territory, through work ethic, corporate loyalty, and a concept of honor in craftsmanship that looked almost medieval to outside observers, because it was. Loyalty to the feudal lord became loyalty to the company. Dedication in battle became dedication in manufacturing. The shame of failure that once demanded seppuku transformed into the Japanese corporate culture of responsibility, where executives resign publicly over quality failures rather than deflect blame. Japan did not abandon Bushido, it translated it. And now here is the question that this story leaves you with. The samurai class was abolished, their weapons were banned, their world collapsed around them 3 separate times, and yet the values that defined them, loyalty, mastery, honor, discipline, survived every single collapse. Not because they were preserved in museums, because they were useful, because they worked, because people kept choosing them even when no one required it. So here's what I want you to think about when you leave this video. Every person has a code they live by. Most people just never named it, never examined it, never decided if it was actually theirs or just something they inherited and never questioned. The samurai spent their entire lives asking one question above all others. What am I willing to die for? Most of us never ask it, which means we also never answer its twin. What am I willing to live for? The samurai who sold his sword did not stop being a samurai, because the samurai was never the sword. He was the person who carried it. The weapon changes, the code doesn't, unless you let it.